Good afternoon. I want to thank you all for being here. I am Harold Mock, the Director of Georgia College's Leadership Programs. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this Usery Forum on Leadership. This afternoon, we have the pleasure of hosting Deke Copenhaver, a consultant and best-selling author. Before we go any further, I need to tell you that this event is being recorded. By participating in this program, you are consenting to being recorded. If you would prefer to view the recording instead of participating, please leave this meeting and email leadership.programs@gcsu.edu. We are honored to welcome Mr. Copenhaver to Milledgeville and to Georgia College. Catherine Cooper will introduce Mr. Copenhaver in a moment, but before we get started, I'd like to share just a few words with you about this forum. The Usery Forum on Leadership is a presentation discussion series on leadership and the public good. The forum honors the memory of the 15th U.S. Secretary of Labor, W.J. Usery, Jr. The series is made possible through the generosity of Mr. and Mrs. Melvin and Elise Usery. Secretary Usery began his career as a machinist in the naval shipyards in Brunswick, and during the Second World War served as an underwater welder on a repair ship in the Pacific in the U.S. Navy. He built a long career, a storied career of being able to bring people together across difference. He served in 5 U.S. presidential administrations appointed by both Republicans and Democrats, trusted by management and labor, and that's something awfully hard to achieve, as Mr. Copenhaver will talk with us about this afternoon. Secretary Usery had a unique way of bringing people together in the service of causes bigger than themselves, and that's truly what we seek to honor in this forum that bears his name, also embodied in our distinguished presenter. I'd like to acknowledge just a few special guests who are with us this afternoon. Mr. and Mrs. Tom and Sandra Rossiter, who are members of our Leadership Advisory Board. Mrs. Jane Kidd, who is our Alex Gregory Distinguished Fellow and Leader in Residence. I'd also like to acknowledge our program partners, the John E. Sahlstrom Honors College, which is represented by Dean Brian Newsom, and the Georgia College and State University Foundation, which is represented by Seth Walker. We're joined by guests online, including alumni from across the various the ages of Georgia College. And whether you're a Bobcat or a Colonial or a Jesse, we want to welcome you this afternoon and say thank you for being here. And we hope that this event will remind you why you love Georgia College so much, because we have the opportunity to ask and answer big questions with smart people. And we hope to host you again on campus soon. Most of all, students, I'm glad that you all are here. I invite you to pull out your telephones, and if you do not follow us online, you can follow us at Lead Creatively. If there's anything that we talk about this afternoon that you'd like to share on social media, we ask you to use the hashtag #ForThePublicGood. But please do follow us at Lead Creatively. One of the most important elements of these events is that we get to hear from you. Mr. Copenhaver will make some time for questions. So I encourage you, please make notes on the note cards in front of you, things that you want to ask him or talk about, and write them down. If you do not currently have an active subscription to the New York Times, I want to remind you that all Georgia College faculty, staff, and students can scan this QR code and activate your free subscription to the New York Times. Or you can go to accessnyt.com, select Georgia College from the drop-down. As I usually do, I'll remind you that we have a lot of other periodicals and good newspapers on subscription in Russell Library. So if the New York Times isn't your cup of tea, we have a lot of good resources available. With that, again, I want to thank you for joining us. I will now ask that Catherine Cooper introduce our distinguished presenter, Mr. Copenhaver. Thank you, Katie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Deke Copenhaver is principal of Copenhaver Consulting, LLC. From 2005 to 2014, he served as mayor of Augusta, Richmond County. After leaving office, he hosted There It Is with Deke Copenhaver, a live daily radio show. He has also served as managing consultant for the Augusta Economic Development Authority. Copenhaver has been recognized on multiple occasions by Georgia Trend magazine as one of the 100 most influential Georgians. He has spoken widely on city design, economic development, healthcare, veterans issues, and the nonprofit sector. He currently authors a monthly column on leadership published by the Georgia Municipal Association. Copenhaver earned a BA in political science from Augusta College and is a graduate of Leadership Georgia and the Mayor's Institute on City Design. He is the author of The Changemaker, The Art of Building Better Leaders. Please join me in welcoming Deke Copenhaver to Georgia College.
Thank y'all so much, and thank you for having me here today. This is my favorite thing to do, is to talk to young people. I'm so passionate about it because I feel like our nation and our world fundamentally has the greatest need that we've ever had for a new generation of leaders that are focused on servant leadership. That's what I tried to focus on in my 9 years in office, but I was discussing with somebody, so fortunately all local elections in Georgia are nonpartisan. So I got to run and serve as an independent, so I was not cleaving to one side or the other, but I also, when I was growing up, had statesmen in both parties that would reach across the aisle. I mean, as the namesake of this symposium is, but that to me was so amazing to see these men and women get things done. And I respected them for being statesmen and being able to work together across all lines. So that was what I tried to emulate when I ran for office. It's interesting, I was sharing before coming up here, there's a former congressman from Georgia. I was 37 years old when I announced my run for office of Augusta. So Doug Bernard, former congressman, he was 83 years old, and he wrote the first letter to the editors to support my campaign that anybody ever did. So he had spent a lifetime, he's working the phones, he's walking neighborhoods, but he always believed in fostering and mentoring new leaders. And so that's a huge focus of mine, that when you see what's going on politically, that to me, so much of what we're seeing, there are bipartisan efforts in Congress. There are a lot of people working for local governments doing great jobs, but it seems like particularly in Congress, we've incentivized bad behavior, right? So Congress people will, they'll act out in some way and get a lot of immediate attention for probably not the most positive thing, and then they send out fundraising emails. I'm like, so that would be like kids. I don't have kids myself, but every time a child gave a tantrum, it's like, okay, well, here, have more candy. And why don't we throw some caffeine on that? Let's just reward your bad behavior. And that to me, and I shared with some people earlier on, so when I was in office, it was a job to me, right? Augusta's a city of 200,000 people, but I'm a more high-profile city worker, but I don't put myself above the people I serve or the people I work with. So I've shared with people, I took being a public servant seriously. So being a public servant meant that I was there to serve the public, not there to serve any one political party, not there to serve special interest groups. I was there to serve the 200,000 people that live in Augusta, Richmond County. And I would always tell people, a lot of these people voted for me, a lot of them didn't, and some people didn't vote at all. But I should value all of their needs equally. And I did that for 9 years, but I never went negative, because I think leaders, when I see people just, to me, leadership is, there's something about you that people want to follow. And I think that's focused on being positive. I've shared with people a lot of times that if you have to use fear and intimidation to get your desired result, which we see a lot of these days, it's in corporate America, it's in America in general, that's bullying. What leadership is about is making people feel safe, secure, and that their voices are heard. and focus on bringing people together on common ground and providing them hope. I mean, I go and talk to people around the country, and unfortunately, there are a lot of people, politically at least, that I know that are like, we've checked out. We're not going to vote, we're not going to do anything, because they just don't have hope. And that's so sad to me. I'm like, look, I know it can be bad politically, but we live in the greatest country on earth. We're fortunate that I can come and speak to y'all tonight on this beautiful afternoon. There are places that can't happen. And I've shared with folks that I'm the youngest of 5 children. My dad flew B-17 bombers in World War II as a teenager. I'm like, and I can't imagine that. I was at the University of Georgia when I was 18 years old, and I was not concerned with protecting democracy or, protecting our nation's freedom, but that generation did that. And to protect our democracy, and now, democracy is a fragile thing, and I have some concerns at times, but I'm like, now we have people in elected office that are afraid to speak truth to power because they want to hang on to their little bit of power or, whatever they're doing. So it has to be, I think, this generation that really gets us beyond toxic polarization and leads us forward. I was sharing with somebody before coming up here, I have a podcast that I've been doing for 2.5 years. And so I've connected with a startup out of San Francisco that builds communities around podcasts. So they've worked with the Kelsey brothers. I'm like, I know Taylor Swift had something to do with the popularity of their podcast, but we're purposely going to start focusing more on the younger generation of established leaders and emerging leaders, because I think we ought to incentivize good behavior and hold up guys like you going, look at the outstanding work that these young people are doing at Georgia College. Look at this leadership program. And that's who I want to emulate. So I'm dating myself, but I'm no longer on TikTok. But sometimes when I see college students on TikTok, it's not all bad, but their whole self-worth is based on their outfits and their jewelry and how many TikTok followers they have. I'm like, is that really, what does that lead to in the long run? Because somebody's always going to have more followers than you. But I think leadership, sometimes it's just doing what nobody else wants to do. As I say, I was 37 when I ran for office, and my friends and family were like, you don't need to do this. Why are you going to do this? It's going to be tough and difficult. I'm like, well, because I know if everybody takes that attitude and nobody takes a leap of faith and steps out and challenges the status quo, nothing is ever going to change. So it is, it's being willing to take that leap of faith, and it takes a lot of courage. So one thing I will share with y'all too, though, and I want to give you a good example of what it can lead to lead through love and compassion, which is what I did for 9 years in office. So last April, I was found out I have esophageal cancer. And believe it or not, my voice sounds better right now than it has for the past year. But so when I found out, when I got my diagnosis, I went to my former chief of staff, who is now chief of staff at the Georgia Cancer Center. His name is Al Dallas. I said, Al, I like to be proactive. I've got these platforms where I'm still pretty high profile. What can we do? So this was me getting cancer, ironically, was an exercise in leadership. He said, man, we've got the cancer walk coming up in 3 weeks. Why don't you put together a team? I'm like, could do that? Great. So we set as a goal for our team $10,000. We were going to focus on raising $10,000. So, and the overall goal for the campaign was $75,000. We ended up raising in 3 weeks $53,000. And this is 8 years out of office. But the overall raise hit $115,000. I said, that sea of goodwill that I spent 9 years cultivating and building leading through love and compassion, it's still there 8 years out of office. So leading through fear and intimidation, you can get your desired outcome and increase profits or whatever, but it's really focused on leadership the right way and bringing people together on common ground. I'm like, what a beautiful thing. people just rallied around us. And the cool thing about that too is I can afford really good cancer care. I mean, we were discussing, MD Anderson is probably the best cancer center in the nation, but a big portion of what the Georgia Cancer Center does is they provide world-class cancer care to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it. So what that $53,000 did, or the $115 overall, and the people it served, I'm like, that just does my heart good. But that is proof positive that leading in that way, is not always easy, because people expect you to come out of character and, act like in politics, act like a typical politician, but that's just not the way to have your leadership be, to leave a legacy. And when so much, it just disturbs me when so much of what we see is in pop culture is, well, if you're the biggest liar, cheater, and thief, then you're going to win $1 million. And I'm like, I think that's just not, that's not what leadership is. But so I spoke at Augusta University this morning to the dean of students there. He's about to do a speech on the importance of a university education. I said, it is that university and this university should be producing the leaders in our country of tomorrow, because it shows you, coming to a university, you know how to be around a diverse group of people. You learn how to get along with others. You learn how to collaborate and cooperate, which are all so important, and communicate. All of those features are so important for good leaders. But I think there's hope, and I shared with a group of students earlier. So we don't really see, the mainstream media does not give the whole picture. But I would ask that you guys consider, somebody in this room or whoever it may be, ask that you consider. I mentor a young man, he's 25 years old. He is the CEO of a national nonprofit called Bridge USA. So they are on 60 college campuses, bringing together students of different political ideologies to talk about how can we work together to solve the big picture problems facing our nation. There is a Bridge Africa chapter and a Bridge Europe chapter too. But this is pretty interesting. So I had a call with him last week. He said, since October 7th, we have had more productive dialogue with Jews and Muslims on college campuses than we've ever had before. It's just, people want to come together and talk about this. He said, but all you see in the media are university presidents getting fired and protests. But he said, you don't see any of this, that you actually have people on the two sides of the issue that can come and have a conversation. And if you're not, there's a former prime minister of Israel, I believe it was Moshe Dayan, that said, if you want peace, you don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies. And so that's what I think is one of the problems that we're seeing in society today, is when people aren't willing to sit at a table and have conversations about how do we get beyond this. And that's what I would always tell people. I looked at it, I came from a background in real estate and development, but in any business, you have people sit at the negotiating table, it's give and take, you come to a meeting of the minds, and not everybody gets what they want, but then everybody gets something out of the deal. But if we don't, politically and or otherwise, people aren't even willing to sit at the table, how do you address these big picture issues? But I believe, based on seeing what's going on with Bridge USA, with your generation, and I would love to see y'all get a chapter here, your generation really does want to come together to solve these big picture issues. I think that's part of the reason why you're here right now. And I think my role right now is to mentor that next generation of leaders. And I'll give you, so I wrote a best-selling book. And after it came out in 2019, I was interviewing with a 20-something-year-old reporter in Augusta. And she said, yeah, but don't you think that focusing on the middle is lukewarm? I said, no, I think bringing people together on common ground is actually really, really cool. But I thought about it, and you guys are sort of in the same generation. Politically, it's almost like the extreme polarization is all you guys have ever known. And it's like, it wasn't always that way. And we could A lot of people in the room can speak to that. But mentioning, my father flying B-17 bombers in World War II, the greatest generation as they're known, I believe that they became that because they had to. And I think your generation has the potential. You came through COVID, you're interconnected, but I think your generation has the potential to be the next great generation. And I think it's gonna happen, but I'll give you, so I'm Generation X. So don't resist the labels, because I hear people say, well, Generation Z is very lazy. I'm like, well, I said that about Generation X as well. And I was sharing with some students, I had an older couple I know, and I was talking to them at a restaurant, and I said, well, what do you think about this next generation of leaders? They said, oh, well, they're lazy and everything. I'm like, wait a minute, what is your sample of that? They said, well, we talk to our friends' grandkids every now and again. I'm like, so you're basing your opinion of an entire generation on like 5 kids that aren't even in your own family? Do you know how silly that is? But as I was saying, my friend Manu that is CEO of Bridge USA, he is on a plane traveling the United States 3 weeks out of every month. And he calls me sometimes and he's like, man, I get lonely. I'm like, unfortunately, leadership and taking that leap of faith can be lonely at times, but I'm like, just call me when you feel that way, because I think you're doing the most important work right now at 25 years old that you'll probably do in your entire life. So, here again, I just want to say thank you guys so much for having me. And I'm here to mentor your generation. You guys might be some of my future podcast guests, but I'm going to stop there, and I want this to be interactive. So I want to have a conversation, and any question, whatever you want to ask me, feel free. So I was doing a speaking engagement recently, and somebody said, well, you don't sound like a politician. You don't say stuff that politicians say. I'm like, well, I never really was, but I'm like, I survived cancer last year. I'm like, what else are you going to do to me? I can say what I want. And I believe that we do need to say these things and speak truth to power. So with that, I'm just going to open it up to any question you guys may have. And please don't be shy.
So for those of you who have questions, if you'll raise your hand and I can bring the mic over to you.
And I do want to recognize my godson, Jack Collier, that's sitting right back there, whose grandfather was Speaker of the House, was pro tem, and longtime public servant in Atlanta. He was a huge influence on me, Jack, so I want you to know that. Jack Connell.
Hi, I'm Emily Wright. We met a little bit earlier. I'm from
Yes.
Augusta. I love Augusta, so it's really cool to meet someone who led it very recently. I was wondering why you ran for mayor. Like, was there one moment that kind of sparked it, or, anything in your career that built up to that?
Yes, and that's a really good question, and that gets into leadership too. So in 2004, I went through a program called Leadership Georgia. It's the oldest statewide leadership program in the nation. I bet a lot of you guys will end up going through it. But so my graduation weekend in November of 2004, I got off the bus in Thomasville, Georgia. That week, we had our third current or former elected official go under indictment. So it was Democrats, Republicans, male, female, it was black, white. So our governor at the time, Sonny Perdue, his chief of staff was a guy named Eric Tannenblatt, who was on the board of Leadership Georgia. So I get off the bus in Thomasville, and he looks at me and he's like, what are you guys putting in the water up there? And I'm like, I'm so competitive. I'm like, that's it. If a position comes available, I'm gonna run for it. So I did not know, being naive, that I was supposed to go ask people's permission to run for office. So I'm 37 years old, and I'm sitting there going, okay, I've chaired boards of directors, I've run a nonprofit, I've run small businesses, I've got all the training that I need, but I was telling, you were there, I was telling the students earlier, I got called into a back room. It was not smoky, but by a bunch of business leaders that I respected and told not to run because I hadn't paid my dues. And I'm like, look, and they told me that old people wouldn't vote for me, young people wouldn't vote for me, black people wouldn't vote for me. And I'm like, I'm gonna run and I'm gonna win whether you guys are in the race or not. Because what is the difference between leadership experience, running businesses, chairing boards of directors, and being mayor? I didn't see any difference, but so that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I'm like, how bad does that look for our community when people politically are seeing we had 3 current or former elected officials under indictment at the same time? And plus, so I had worked with the city for 4 years. I handled the green space program, which was a land buying program. So I was able to build consensus within the body around at least one issue for 4 years prior to running. And I'm like, if I could have thought of anybody better than me to do it, I would have happily let somebody else do it. But I just legitimately couldn't think of anybody better than myself. But I will be there to help you when you run for mayor. Y'all gotta have some more questions, come on.
Hello, my name is
Hey.
Dale. I wanted to ask, you mentioned that a lot of your views in previous generations lean more towards moderate. And I wanted to ask, you ran as an independent, what were some of the most significant compromises you've made while you were in office?
Yeah, and that's the thing to me is it's like I've never understood when people say they're so dogmatic and they say, well, I'm a member of this political party, my views are never gonna change. I'm like, I think as human beings, we evolve over times and our points of view evolve as well. But I think that's a willingness to listen to the other side. And I would always tell people, I'm like, if you know how to do something better than me, just tell me. But I was discussing with the students, and I was discussing this at Augusta University, I think we need to value the input of the younger generation. And so often it's like, I know at Augusta, it was kind of like, if you were under the age of 40, you were supposed to sit at the children's table. And there was a local gossip columnist that nicknamed me the Boy King. And I'm like, I know CEOs younger than me. I'm like, that's just dismissive. I think every generation has something to give and we can all learn from each other. And I think that's just, but we have to be willing to listen. And it's just, so often when people, so I serve on a national nonprofit. I'm a founding partner of a nonprofit called Starts With Us. So we started in 2021, but we started a program last year that I think has amazing potential where we started in Tennessee. It's called Citizen Solutions, right? So we got 11 people, they're now called the Tennessee 11, on either side of the gun control issue. I mean, they were to extremes on either side. They were able to work together for like 4 or 5 days and come to a consensus on, I mean, gun control is about as controversial as you're gonna get, but coming at from different angles, they came up with, I think it was 12 recommendations that they took to the state legislature and to the governor. And I'm like, I think that's democracy at work. And I told them, I said, but that's, for us to do that in a civil way, it's not like going and threatening the state legislature and the governor and going, you guys are doing things completely wrong, because you can get stuff done by guilting or shaming people into doing it, but you're creating an enemy effectively. So I think to be civil about it, and I said, so these ideas are not being generated. You can't say, well, the left did that or the right did that. These are citizens that have taken the time to come together and thoughtfully come to a group of recommendations. So I think the next one we're doing is now in Illinois. But I'm like, I believe in democracy. I believe in grassroots engagement. And I believe in in asking y'all, and I'll just, from the younger generation, I was saying this earlier, I'd sit in board of meetings and have people say, well, how do we reach the younger generation? I'm like, there's nobody under 40 sitting in this room. And so if we're asking, how do we get input from them, how do we engage you? Why don't we ask people of that generation and value their opinions instead of dismissing them, But here again, we've got something to learn cross-generationally. We all can learn from each other. And thank y'all for asking the questions too.
Hi, I'm Paige, and as you mentioned earlier, you're the author of a best-selling book, and I was just wondering when you felt like you were knowledgeable enough or ready enough to write that book and why.
It's funny you should ask that. So I grew up wanting to be a writer. I didn't want to go into politics. I wanted to write for the magazine Rolling Stone because I love music. But it worked out for me, so I always had intended to publish a book. But as was mentioned, I wrote a leadership column for the Georgia Municipal Association for years and years. So Forbes, like Forbes the magazine, has a publishing division. So they found me through that leadership column. So they sent me an email and asked if I would have an interest in writing a book. And I thought it was a joke or a scam. And I almost deleted it, but I didn't. So it turned out to be for real. But I'll tell you an interesting part about that. So I always focused on leading not to the vocal minorities on either end, but the majority. Because that makes sense to me, that you lead to the middle. But so my editor said when I first started writing the book, said, well, you're going to have to focus on a demographic. And I'm like, I think that's the problem, is that people focus on, getting out their base for these demographics. So 6 months into the process, he goes, man, this is really going to appeal to a lot of people. So after it came out, a lady that's a friend of mine that's African-American, she's vice chair of the Democratic Party in Columbia County, came up to me and she goes, you know what? I love your book. My 18-year-old daughter loves your book, and you need to run for office again. And I don't care if you ran as a Republican, I'd vote for you. Same week, an older gentleman who knows former President Trump and staunch supporter came up to me and was like, man, I love your book, and was just raving on it. And I'm like, I bet those two people couldn't agree on anything else. But I always say, if you want to seek common ground, sometimes it's best to be common ground. So I'm like, I wonder if I tell them that they're diametrically opposed politically, but at least they could have a conversation around my book. So I honestly wish everybody could write a book, because everybody's got a story to tell. But it was the 9 years in office that gave me the story to tell. So last year, I started my second book and got about 6 chapters in, and then I got diagnosed with cancer. So that kind of scuttled that. But I just started writing my second one about my experience with cancer, because here again, good leadership is giving people hope. Frankly, I'm a walking miracle. I should not have I'm like, this is, God's grace is the only way I got through this. And even my oncologist will say that. But cancer is so scary but it's not a death sentence, And so, but some people just shut down. And I'm like, no, I want to tell you my story to provide you with hope. And this is a leadership story too. So I'm a little different of a person, but I loved going through chemotherapy, because you talk about grassroots engagement. When you're in a room full of people for 4.5 hours with no distractions, that you have this shared communal experience. That's the purest form of grassroots engagement. But throughout the process, I had a spirit of hope and just, I was not worried, but to be able to share that sense of hope with people at the grassroots level that might not have it is such a blessing. But I viewed that as leadership, to share hope and comfort. But I'm like, this is my team now. Everybody sitting in this room is my team. But I will share this with you guys. So I would pray, I'm like, Lord, every bit of grace and blessings you've bestowed on me, use me as a vessel to bless others. So this happened 2 times. I'm in the nurses station at Augusta Oncology. So there's a young guy sitting next to me. He's like 20-something years old. He goes, "You're Deke Copenhaver, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Man, my wife loves you. I love you. My family loves you. You were the best mayor we ever had." And so I'm like, "Man, that's so cool." So then an older gentleman that was having his first treatment, 70-something years old, he's like, "I know who you are, and I feel the same way." And then the nurse goes, "Yeah, I told you you've got all these fans in here." So we're like high-fiving and fist bumping, and I'm like, "Man, I got your back. We're all in this together." And I'm like, I don't even want to leave this room because the energy was so good there. But I left, and I'm like, that's the manifestation of that prayer. But that's, part of good leadership is providing that hope. And I'm like, I don't think most people want to be. Fear is a powerful emotion that people use to manipulate you. But I don't think most people, we live in a stressful society. I don't know anybody in this room that would say, yes, I want to be made to feel more afraid, or yes, I want to feel more stressed out. That is not leadership.
Hello.
Hello.
You briefly mentioned Bridge USA. So my question is, if we wanted to see something like that emerge on our campus, is that something that we as students can initiate? And if we do, how could we go about that?
Yes, and you guys can just reach out to me. As I say, Manu, their CEO, is a good friend of mine, but y'all will appreciate this too. So when we first met, I was talking to him, and he said, "How do you keep your energy level up in doing what we do?" He's like, "I've got people that are my age that get burned out on this." So the fall of 2019, when my book first came out, so the University of Texas El Paso's Student Engagement and Leadership Center discovered the book and put it in their Powerful Pages program. So it was in January of 2020 that I first learned about Bridge USA. So when I went to UTEP to speak, I suggested that they look into getting a chapter. Well, when I first mentioned UTEP, Manu was like, "Man, we got a chapter down there now." I'm like, "Well, you know why that is? Because I planted the seed in 2020, but I said that is what keeps me in the game, that in leadership positions, if you focus on planting seeds, you're not always going to see them all come to fruition. But when you do in something like that," I'm like, that was 2019, and I had no idea, but now in 2022, you tell me that they've got a great chapter at UTEP. So yes, we'll make that happen. I planted that seed with Augusta University this morning and with the University of Georgia. I want to see chapters all over Georgia. But it's really cool to see what they're doing. And basically, they formed because they're like, okay, older generations, and we've done a lot of good, older generations have, but they've created politically, they've created a lot of these problems that we're going to have to deal with them at some point. So why not start when we're students? Man, y'all are asking great questions.
Hi, my
Hey.
name's Cecilia. So this summer, I was able to study abroad across leadership, and we were focusing across cultures. And one thing we learned was how there's usually a threshold for leadership in different industries, and then there's kind of going above and beyond that, sets leaders apart. And you talked about how you see commonality across the multiple different industries you worked in, those leadership skills that translate so well.
Yeah.
So what would you consider those threshold abilities that you knew, okay, I can go for mayor, I can go from this to that, but what do you think set you apart in those skills that elevated your leadership?
I think it's effective communication. And I was discussing with the people at Augusta University this morning. So public speaking comes natural to me, but I did take a class in college, public speaking, and I'm like, I think everybody that's interested in leadership ought to have to take a public speaking class, because effective communication. So one of the things I've focused on as a speaker is I've sat in audiences where the speaker has droned on and I've gotten really bored. And I'm like, I'm never going to do that. So a former mayor of Augusta, when I first was elected, I spoke at something and he goes, thank God you've learned the art of brevity. And my dad always would teach me, he's like, never speak just to hear yourself talk. Only speak if you've got something to really add to the conversation. But effective communication, and that goes both ways. That's not just speaking, that's listening. I mean, that is, but to be able to, it's almost like to be able to put things in an elevator conversation to sort of hook people into what you're trying to help them with. I think that's important. And it's funny for me, like I stopped cussing like 30 years ago, and it was not I didn't really think about it, but there was a thought that hit me. I'm like, if I have to use curse words to punctuate things I'm saying to get my point across, am I really an effective communicator? So that, I just kind of did that, but no, communication is key. That's what we are. And it's funny, I talk about painting with a broad brush, because people will say, here again, your generation, they're always on their cell phones all the time. And I'm like, everybody's on their cell phones all the time. That's not like one generation. But they say, well, they don't know how to have conversations. I'm like, meet the young people that I'm meeting that enjoy good conversations and enjoy learning and everything. That's just to dismiss an entire generation offhand is just, frankly, ridiculous to me. But it is that it takes discipline to be able to effectively listen. And I tell people, it takes more strength to hold your tongue with patience than it does to ever release your tongue in anger.
Hi, I'm Mary, and all of us are special education majors. And I was wondering if you have any advice for us on how to ensure that our students are wanting to take advantage of the leadership roles that are being provided for them.
Golly, God bless you for what you guys are doing and are gonna do. And that's, it doesn't, I think sometimes we have these perceptions of leaders as on a pedestal or some great person. I'm like, everybody, all of us are faulted. We're all flesh and blood, we're human. But I mean, just because, a kid is in a special ed class does not mean that they can't be a leader. And so I think that's never write anybody off. I'll give you a great example. So I've got a friend of mine that's a leadership guru out of Vancouver, Canada, right? So, literally world known, Dov Barron is his name. But he had somebody send him a client. And so the guy came in and they're talking, and the guy's just talking, just beating around the bush. And he's like, look, man, my time's expensive. Somebody's paying for you to be here. What's the issue? So the guy was a white supremacist in Canada he was like the leader. But because when he had kids, he looked at him and he said, they didn't look at me judging me. And he said, the whole reason I got into that movement was mainstream society made me feel like I didn't fit in, and they made me feel like I did. But but he started telling my friend about this, and my friend is like starting to laugh and everything. And the guy goes, what are you laughing about? He goes, well, I'm a Jew, mate. And so they ended up developing this incredible relationship. They spoke at the United Nations about how to he's like one of the main guys in the world for getting people out of that movement. But it's like, if Dov, my friend, had just said, I don't want any part of you but somebody asked him, said, how do you want to work with somebody that wanted to eradicate your entire race? He said, because when I look at the world, I don't see the world, I see me. He said he was very intelligent, he was very insecure, he was very young, so he was very impressionable and was easy to get pulled into that movement. He's like, I was that guy when I was 20-something years old. I was intelligent, I was angry, I was all of those things. But talk about listening. I mean, most people I think would say, there's the door, get out of my office. But they have this amazing relationship and they're doing tremendous good in the world.
I actually have a question really quickly, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You've mentioned your commitment to remaining moderate despite how controversial the political issues were during your time as mayor.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that ever required you to compromise or reevaluate your personal beliefs.
No, it didn't. But I will tell you, I mean, it's funny. So I made mention, I think earlier today, that I got attacked from the extremes on either side. And so when I was in office, I joined a group called Mayors Against Illegal Guns, because I'm like, who wouldn't be against illegal guns? That just sounds like common sense to me. Well, Michael Bloomberg had started it, and I didn't realize that it was a controversial group. So there's a group called the Georgia Gun Owners Association that's very right-wing. So they put out an email that said, let's tell these anti-gun mayors what we think about them. So, but all of that, they said they had 20,000 members. It generated maybe 100 calls and emails, of which I took every one and said, man, I'm a lifelong hunter. I'm a gun owner myself. I'm not anti-gun. But the people say, well, they never said anything about that. I'm like, yeah, well, of course they didn't. But I think that in leadership roles, if they had 20,000 members, in a statewide hit piece, they would have generated a whole lot more. But so often, I think elected officials, they get so insular that they think that the vocal minority is prevailing public opinion when it's not. So literally 2 weeks later, my first day in office, we had started a prayer breakfast that 18 years later is still going on, non-denominational. People go to different houses of worship. But so 2 weeks after I get attacked by the Georgia gun owners, I get a letter from the Freedom from Religion Foundation telling me that we needed to cease and desist with the prayer breakfast because it violated the separation of church and state, which no city resources were ever spent on that. So the Freedom from Religion Foundation is headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin. So we had a group that was updating a master plan for the city that was in town that was from Madison. I'm like, yeah, I've got a group up there that's just not happy with me. They said, who's that? And I said, it's the Freedom from Religion Foundation. He said, it drives me crazy. They have this picture on their website of this palatial building that says that's their world headquarters. He said, that building does not exist in Madison. He said, it's a group of people in a storefront that are just doing internet-based research every day to try to find somebody to sue. But I'm like, well, now, if I caught it from the extremes on either end in 2 weeks, but I'm like, then I'm doing what's right for the majority of the people I serve. So I went through a church leadership program the year that I ran for office, and the facilitator said in church politics, and I think this was my rule of thumb, my entire time in office, said that in church politics, or in almost any organization, there are 3% that are against everything, 3% that are for everything. Those 3% on either side are very, very vocal. Then there's 12% that's for but, 12% that's against but, not as vocal, but that's 30%. And so then you've got the 70% in the middle that just want to see things move forward. So if you're governing in any position to the vocal minority of the 3% on either side, you're not doing what's in the best interest of the majority of the people you serve. And so, but it's not fun to be attacked, I will say that.
Thank you. I believe we have time for a couple more audience questions, so if there's anyone else who I haven't seen yet. Okay, thank you guys.
Hi, I just want to ask, it seems like you're a big proponent for moderation in politics and kind of aiming towards the middle, but it seems like candidates today are becoming more and more polarizing. Do you think that trend is going to continue, or do you think that that's going to shift soon?
It's interesting you should say that. So it starts with us that I'm a founding partner with. We did a poll 2 years ago that showed that 87% of the American people are sick of hyperpartisan politics. they call it the exhausted majority. So it's just such an interesting time because we're allowing the tail to wag the dog and the tyranny of the minority. So I use as an example what happened in Congress with the Speaker of the House. So Matt Gaetz, like him or hate him, no seniority, but he ends up engineering getting, the first Speaker of the House ever in the history of our nation run out of that position. So he basically, but I did the research. I wrote an article for a publication called The Fulcrum, but he won District 1 in Florida in 2022 with 67% of the vote, which looks very, strong. But when you look at the percentage of people that live there's like 137,000 people that live in his district. So he effectively had the support based on voting of, I think it was like 20% of the people that live in his district. So, and then I extrapolated that to the electorate in America. So it was like, if you do it that big, this guy had the support of 1.01% of Americans. But yet, he could bring the government to a standstill, for however long. So I think ranked choice voting, I think we need to do that. I think I've gotten to be doing some work with the Forward Party that Andrew Yang's starting. I think we could use a viable third party. But the Forward Party initially this year wanted to get on the ballot in all 50 states, but now they're only doing the battleground states because both parties, Democrats and Republicans, fought having them get on the ballot. So it's almost like, if you've got a corner on the market, do you really want competition? And to our two established parties, a viable third party would be competition. But I'm still hopeful. So in Congress in 2022, representation by 20 and 30-something-year-olds grew by 40%. So there is a group called the Future Caucus that just started a chapter in Atlanta. They're in like 30-plus state capitals. They've been in Washington for about 10 years. So they've recruited 20 and 30-something-year-old legislators and taught them creative problem solving. That age range is getting more bipartisan legislation passed in Congress and in state houses than any other generation. But nobody knows that it's happening. So I do have hope, but a lot of that revolves around your generation. And it's just what some of the things the political parties are doing, I don't understand. So for the extreme Republicans to go after Taylor Swift, I'm like, okay, you've got somebody who's a generational icon that is, oh, by the way, creating these communal experiences for people that might feel disaffected otherwise, but they go to Taylor Swift's concert, they feel a part of something bigger than themselves. And she's not really controversial but I'm like, but you say that you want to grow the base of the party to include younger people and women, and then you're going to attack Taylor Swift, who's a cultural icon to the younger generation. That just makes no sense to me, but I'm not in charge of partisan politics either.
Hi. So I know that you're an accomplished athlete as well as being an accomplished politician. Is there any correlation to your successes running Ironmans that has also led to success in leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. So people picture Ironman as an individual sport, but to me, you're all out there together and everybody's encouraging everybody else. So, which is, and the people that finish last that are like, 70-something-year-old cancer survivors, which I'm thinking about doing it again this year since I've survived cancer. But yes, and just that competitive spirit, that's like I told you when people said, you haven't paid your dues, and I said, I'm going to run and I'm going to win whether you guys are in the race or not. to be healthy, I mean, to be competitive is healthy. It's not like you're just trying to beat somebody else, but you gotta have confidence too. And so yes, and I'll tell you honestly, when I got diagnosed with cancer, I viewed it as a race. And so I told the doctors, I said, okay, I'm gonna make a deal with you. I don't wanna know a prognosis. I don't wanna know the stage. I don't wanna know any of that because the treatment's gonna be the same no matter what. And I'm not gonna just sit and worry about that. You just tell me what I need to do to get better. And the first thing I asked them, I said, can I continue to exercise? They said, as much as you can do. So, but I'll even say with that, in my situation, I'm 56, and I know people my age that have just, stopped maintaining their physical fitness. I'm like, everybody is gonna have some sort of ailment at some point, and to maintain your fitness level throughout your life is very important, and that even doing that event was part of leadership to me because I figured, I'm like, if people can see that the mayor takes the time, can make the time, because I mean, it's a bear, the training schedule, but that I can make the time given my schedule in office, hopefully they'll try to make the time too. And there are a lot of people that did that. So, and I always tell people, I'm like, the only power that any leader should concern themselves with is the power to inspire, because no one individual can do anything alone, but if you can inspire people to work with you, there's really nothing you can't do. So I'm part of this group out of Europe, like this mastermind group, but I was speaking to two guys the other day and I said, I figured out I am not a motivational speaker, I'm an inspirational speaker. And the guy said, well, I'll tell you why that is. I said, why? He said, because motivation lights a fire underneath you, inspiration lights a fire inside of you. And so that's what I want to do this year, because from an election standpoint, it's a crucial year, but I want to get out on the road and be in front of as many people as I can and inspire them to be a part of this bridging movement, which Bridge USA is a part of, starts with us. There are over 500 bridging organizations bringing together people of different political ideologies, doing amazing work, but it doesn't fit with the media narrative. So I'm trying to shine a light on that and say, we have hope as a nation. Don't check out. But yes, so that's a very long answer to that question. But thank you.
Hey, how are you? There's been speculation over the years of a law being passed to prohibit Congress members of engaging in the New York Stock Exchange, and I kind of wanted to get your opinion on what you believe will happen, if that will ever happen, because there has been a history of members of Congress or of politicians that make millions of dollars with some of the inside information they receive, and if you think that's something that will indefinitely happen or that will never happen.
I think it should, but it's interesting. I was speaking at an event years ago when I was in office. I'm a founding partner of a statewide nonprofit called Georgia Forward that's trying to get Georgia away from the two Georgias issue, Atlanta versus the rest of the state. But Augusta is consolidated. It's Augusta-Richmond County. And so we were debating the pros and cons of consolidation. And, so somebody said, well, it's good, but you have to do away with constitutional officers to do it. And I said, look, politics is not about, for the most part, to a large degree, I don't want to, say there are no good people in office doing good things, because there are. But I said so much of it, it's not about black and white, Democrat and Republican, male and female. It's about power and control. And once you give somebody a little bit of it, good luck taking it away from them. So it's just kind of like, are they really, because it seems like term limits come up every now and again and both sides float it and then it just goes away. And so it is so unfortunate to me that you do see so many former elected officials that have really used the position to enrich themselves. I mean, tremendously enrich themselves. And I'm like, what message does that send to the public? It's sad, but I go back to me, being a public servant is a noble calling. So for your generation, that's what I hope that a new generation of people focus on serving others rises up.
I wanted to ask if you could give your 18 or 20-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Stop drinking so much beer, probably. No, it would to not worry so much, because I think, I went through this. You get to a certain point, you're like, oh my gosh, I got to get out of college. I can't wait to get out of college and everything. And there's no need to be in such a hurry to get through life. And I think it's so many people, and y'all know this, it's almost like a badge of honor. Well, how are you? I'm busy. I'm really, really busy. And it's like we say that busyness is this great thing, but I'm like, sometimes we need to slow down a little bit and appreciate, and maybe it's coming through me going through what I went through last year, but I'm like, it's just, life is about building relationships, and for me, building stronger communities. And it's really cool to be swept up with others in something that's bigger than yourself. And so I would say, just once again, don't worry as much. The future's gonna be fine. I'm sure that my parents thought there were times when maybe I wasn't gonna be okay, but my dad always said that you never listened to me. And I said, no, I did. It just took me a while to let it sink in. And you were right. But to just not be in that hurry, to not overvalue things like social media. There are good parts to that, but our self-worth should not come from how many likes we get, how many followers we have, all that. That's all saccharine, but to lead a life of service and getting the opportunity to work with others and look back on that's worthwhile.
Wonderfully said. I'm afraid we're nearly out of time, but I wanted to ask if you had any last words you wanted to share with the group.
Oh, I can always think of some last words. Just thank you guys for being interested in leadership. Because as I say, we need more good leaders. We need good leaders now more than we ever have. But it is true leadership to me. It is based on serving, and that's got to be at the heart of the DNA to me to be truly effective and transformative. And I'm like, I tell people, you can't fake sincerity. And I get why a lot of your generation has no interest in politics, because it doesn't seem like it's chock full of sincerity or authenticity. And your generation has been sold to your entire life. If somebody's effort to engage you is just doing it to make money or to serve their own purposes, I think your generation can detect that better than most. So, like gearing my podcast to really focus on emerging young leaders, that's because it's in my DNA. It's what I've always done. And I'm like, as far as the research that we've done, there's nobody else in my age range out there doing that. But I'm like, I think that's the most important work that I can do for our country, is to engage, encourage, and uplift your generation of leaders. So don't give up. That leadership is not always easy, and it can be lonely at times, but it pays off in the end for sure. To do it the right way and not take shortcuts.
Well, let's thank Mr. Copenhaver for joining us at Georgia College.
Deke. Deke.
Thank y'all. Thank you, Deke. I want to thank you all for being with us and say that I'm glad that you were here to learn from such a wonderful practitioner about leadership and leadership as service. If any of you have maybe a question or comment, Deke, I'm sure, can give you just a minute or two. But thank you all. Thanks for being here. And join me one more time in thanking Deke for joining us at Georgia College.